Welcome in everyone to a brand new episode of American Joyride. Today I'm very happy to be joined by Tyler Gray, a SEAL Team 6 actor and a former Special Operations member in the United States Army. Tyler, thank you very much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David.
So I got to be honest with you, I know a handful of guys from the unit you served in back in the day in Iraq. I asked, who do you guys want me to interview? Asked the viewers, your name came up quite a bit. We've been going back and forth. We finally got a date figured out. So this is exciting, and I really want to kind of start at the beginning. How did you find yourself in the Army?
That's a great question. And I'll say this, and this will kind of transition to what I did later. But when I was a kid, there was only two things I wanted to do from as long as I can remember, and one was be in the military, but it was always the Army, and I quite frankly think that was due to the movie First Blood. I wanted to be a Green Beret, because of Rambo, growing up in the 80s. And then the other one was, and then kind of also to a degree because of Rambo, I also wanted to work in entertainment. So those were the only two things that I really wanted to do as a kid. And when I got, out of high school, I realized that I had to do one, or I should do one before I did the other. Obviously the military made a lot more sense. And so joined the military, and then went to the other career later.
That's fascinating. And walk me through kind of, you go to the Rangers, right? Rangers first, then you're going to go eventually to the Army's Special Mission Unit, aka Delta Force, which everyone watching this knows about. Was there anything that shocked you when you showed up to the Rangers? Was there anything that you were just utterly unprepared for?
No, not really. Not that I can. The only thing I can think of was, my first. I had all these visions of all the cool stuff I wanted to do, and my first job in Ranger Battalion was an assistant gunner. So you're not a machine gunner; you're the assistant to the machine gunner. That's about the most uncool job that you can have in infantry, at least. So I didn't even carry a rifle at that time. I carried barrels and ammunition. So that I guess threw me a little bit. I had all these visions of kicking indoors and doing all the cool stuff, and there I was, schlepping a bunch of ammo and spare barrels and a tripod. So that was very unsexy, and I guess that surprised me from what I wanted to do versus what I was doing for like a year and a half.
And this is pre 9/11, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So let's go to 9/11 then. Do you remember where you were? I assume obviously everyone kind of does.
Yeah.
How quickly did you realize something's going on and we're going to be involved in whatever happens next? Because you're still a Ranger at that point in time, correct?
Yeah, it was very strange, actually. I was in a school, a big Army school, and a leadership school, and so it was really weird in that because I was in a school environment, they really hid us from what was going on. We couldn't watch TV, so like it was really odd because we'd hear things, but we didn't know what was true and what was not. And I think it took a couple of weeks to really realize, again, because we weren't here, I wasn't hearing outside information, knew nothing. But it's interesting because I was supposed to, my ETS date was, I forget, but it was not that far away. And basically I told him, I said, hey, I'm not re-enlisting unless we go to Afghanistan. If we go to Afghanistan, I will re-enlist that day. And then I did when we eventually got orders to deploy. So it was such a fundamental change in the military. It's hard to explain in the attitude.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask next, in the attitude. So you said, if we go, I'll re-enlist. So is your mindset, you're thinking, I want to get after it, like I want to start mixing it up with these dudes over there?
I mean, for me, I joined in during peacetime, and again, you don't pick what happens when you're in, so if it continued to be peacetime, I kind of was going to move on. But then when, ultimately, I think if you join, I joined to go to work, quite frankly. I watched Rambo and I'm like, Rambo had PTSD. And I'm like, oh, that's sweet. I want that. Like, I was a weird kid. I wanted to be the guy fighting it with the sheriff at the end. I was wacky that way. And so when actual combat came up, when a war started, there was no way I was missing that. That's what I joined for, even though it didn't exist at the time and I had no idea it was going to, but I wasn't going to miss it.
Do you remember the first time you ever found yourself in contact with the enemy and what your feelings were? Now it's a real thing. This isn't training. This isn't a simulation. These bullets that are coming our way, they're planning to kill us. Do you remember what that was like?
Yeah, and the easiest way I can, or at least again, I'm going to describe it for myself. It's not as shocking as you'd think it would be.
Okay.
It's just not. You think like, oh my gosh, it's fundamentally different, but it doesn't really feel that different. It's just kind of like, oh, I don't know. It's very accepted and very maybe at that. And again, maybe because I had been, by the time I got to Afghanistan, I was, I think I was a sergeant at that time. So, I had some, time in training and experience, etc. So maybe for me, it wasn't a big deal. Maybe if I was, 18, fresh out of basic training and all, maybe it would have been different. But for me, quite frankly, for me, it was exciting because that's kind of what I had been wanting.
Right. I hear that a lot from veterans, former Rangers, former SEALs, former unit members. They talk a lot about how a lot of them enjoyed it, or at least that's what they say, that they really enjoyed being in contact with the enemy, and it gave them a rush that they've never found doing anything else. So your answer doesn't surprise me, actually. That's kind of what I was expecting. And then how long are you in Afghanistan before you make the choice to try to attempt selection?
Well, so that's actually so very quickly. I got lucky so I was there after Anaconda. So after Anaconda happened, which basically moved all the Taliban to essentially Pakistan. So when I got there was right after Anaconda. So we basically that deployment, we built all the outstations on the Pakistani, or not on, but near the Pakistani border. So all the places that you hear about, Asadabad, Jalalabad, the Korgal Valley, which it really wasn't called that at that time, but all those areas, that's when we built those fire bases. And so I was lucky. I was at a very, very small, I mean, it was really like a small compound. It was just one platoon. I was a sniper at that time, and I got attached to a unit team because they didn't have a sniper. So I got to work with them on a couple missions, and after that, I was like, "Yep, this is what I'm going to do." And so then, as soon as I got back from Afghanistan, I put in a packet.
So let me ask you about that. I want to drill down and see you're attached to a unit team. You're not a member of the unit at this time. You're an Army Ranger. What was your perception of those guys the first time you got to work with them? Because I hear from a lot of people, and I'll paraphrase, when they work with members from the unit, it's like they think they're larger than life. Like these dudes are superheroes compared to the rest of us. Is that kind of the same impression you had?
The best way I can describe it, or not the best way I can describe it, a thing that does a great job of capturing it is Black Hawk Down. I mean, they really did a good job. I mean, you saw them as gods, and when I was a Ranger, I was just like, it was like when it came to combat, it was like they were Morpheus. It's like they knew what was going to happen before, it was very strange. And also actually the guy that led the team that I was attached to, and I'll just say this now because it's what are the odds? 4 year, whatever, I forget the exact time, but 4 years later, that guy that ran that team, 4 years later, he is the exact same person that put the tourniquet on my arm.
Yes, and okay, since we're there, let's dive into that. Let's dive into, so you joined Delta Force, you deploy to Iraq. Is this your first deployment when you get injured with Delta?
No, 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 no. So I had been there, did a deployment to where we spent, well, bounced around, but I spent a lot of time in '04 in Fallujah, and then went back, and then the deployment I got injured on was pretty much, yeah, all in Baghdad. Yeah,
And what year is that? Is that 05, 06?
five. Yeah, five.
Okay, and for our viewers, can you walk our viewers through that? Is, correct me if I'm wrong, '05 is when things are starting to get really, really intense, right? Like Saddam's military is long defeated. They're long gone. Now, again, correct me, you're the expert. We're dealing with an insurgency. Is that a fair way to frame it?
Absolutely. So, 2003, the push in, you have the Iraqi military, which was nice. I wasn't there then, but it must have been nice having, bad guys in uniforms. It must have been awesome. And then '04, you had, certain area, you had like Ramadi and obviously Fallujah that were just the bad areas, for lack of a better term. You had stuff sprinkled all over. I mean, I remember going to Mosul and, bouncing around, but '05 is when it really started heating up.
Is it because of the flood of foreign fighters? Like, why? Explain to me and the viewers, why is '05 when things start to go off the rails a bit?
I think that's just how long it took for the people that the countries that support the foreign fighters. That's just how long it took them to get the logistics to start sending foreign fighters there. I mean, by and large, the Iraqi insurgency wasn't Iraqis.
Right.
There was Iraqi facilitators, absolutely, but I am making up a number, but like 8 out of 10 of the actual fighters were generally from everywhere but Iraq.
Right. Yeah. And I, for viewers of the show, who are listening to this, you've heard other guys from Tyler's old unit make the exact same comment. That's fascinating to me that you're now fighting in Iraq, but you're fighting mostly, by your own estimation, non-Iraqis, even though that's where they've decided to make the battlefield. Let's go to your injury, which you've been open about in previous interviews. You can see it on SEAL Team. There are times where it's visible. It's not a secret. Walk me through how this happens, because it's an explosive device. What do you remember from how it went down?
So there's a lot to give the full explanation of why. I can't give the full explanation of why what happened.
Got it.
Talk about a thing that I can't talk about.
Got it. No, I understand.
Yeah, but it's unfortunate because if I could talk about that part, it would make so much sense. But the very short version is we were in Solder City that night, and we did an offset. So we were walking through Solder City at night, and we hit a house. Like, that's the house. We hit the house. We go inside, and it's just like, or I assume like a law enforcement. You can tell when you go in a house if the people are guilty or not. You can just feel it. Generally, in my experience, if you go in there and they're shouting and the women are going crazy, and it's the wrong house. If you go in and no one says a word, it's the right house, because the guilty just shut up and don't say anything. The not guilty are like, what the hell are you doing here?
Right. Yeah.
Guilty, they're just like, yeah, we know why they're here. It's not surprising. They're not happy about it, but they're not surprised. And so anyways, that house, I was like, nah, just no, not these people. And so anyways, we heard that I think two teams, they're like, hey, we actually think it's over here. So two teams went out. One was actually a team from from the unit that I now play on TV that was attached to us. They went out, they went on the front side, or went around to go to the front side of this other house. And my team was basically going towards the back side of the house. So very shortly, what happened was it was the wrong house. And when we hit that one house, the actual house it was, which was next door, which is not exactly next door because Sutter City is kind of weird of how it's built. But, you know, they heard us. They were getting ready, prepping, you know, their gear, you know, and so they were ready to go. So when that team came around, a bunch of dudes opened up out of the front, what I assume would be the living room, with AKs and shot. I think they shot three. If I'm not mistaken, they shot three of the members of that team. Two of them were pretty much out of the fight at that point. But they were, I mean, it was heavy. I wasn't on that side of the house, but just hearing it, I was like, oh man, that's extreme. So I ran into the back door, which came into the kitchen, cleared through there, went in the hallway, and those same guys, as we approached that room, shot through the walls of that hallway, shot the guy literally right next to me. So then we backed off, and then we were and I'd have to draw it out, but we were in a tactical position that was just there wasn't a lot we could do. So we were trying to kind of figure out how to solve it. And the next thing I know, I remember just the whole room, or actually it wasn't really a room, it was the hallway, you know, so it was more like a tube straight at me, and just everything exploded. And I actually remember hitting the ground and looking up down the hallway. I was just confused. I didn't know what had happened. And I can say, you know, getting shot at, okay. It's one thing, but the explosion made me feel small. It was like a superhero just grabbed me and was like, or it was like the Hulk grabbed me and was like, it felt like a supernatural power. And it blew, so it was a nighttime hit. It blew my nods and my nod mount off my face. So I went from, you know, under nods to not being able to see anything. It obviously, my arm, I thought it blew off. I'm trying to think of what else it wrecked, but wrecked several things. But and everything was pitch black for me, and I really didn't know what was going on. I just felt my arm was blown off, so I got up and walked outside to the back, and there was a wall that we had hopped to get in. That wasn't happening, so I just put my back against the wall and tried to take care of myself. But I never lost consciousness. The only time actually I did lose consciousness is when, and I still to this day don't know how they got me over that wall. I have no idea. But other than that, probably 5 minutes that they got me over the wall, I never lost consciousness.
And I am literally stunned. I don't even know what to say. That is every part of that story, from the moment the first shots rang out to you getting back over the wall, losing consciousness, is hard for me, who's obviously never been in a gunfight, and I assume most people watching this who've never been in a gunfight, to even comprehend. Did you take a moment? Was there a moment when you looked down at your arm and you kind of understood, like, oh shit, like I'm in deep trouble? Or were you in such a state of shock that you didn't even really, quite frankly, understand what had just happened to your body? And if you can explain, how much of your arm are you able to see? Like, do you have a good assessment of how damaged it is in the moment?
So that's not a question I think I've ever been asked, but it's a good question. So when it happened, it killed the nerve in my arm to about here. So and I know this sounds weird, but it's the best way to describe it. So it felt gone from here. It felt not there. I know it sounds weird. And then I got outside, and there was a porch light, and I looked at it, and if you can see, so this was all gone. I mean, it was holding on by, basically half my arm, and it was broken in, I want to say 8 places, so I can't even replicate how it was hanging. And then up here, this was flayed out this way, and this was flayed out this way. So from about just above my wrist to my shoulder, when I looked at my arm in that light, I mean, it was hamburger. It was done. It was hamburger meat. It was zombie flesh. So yeah, I looked at it and I went, well, that's gone. That just that's that that's going. And I knew it was bad. And then my first thing was, well, the arm's going. I'm losing my right arm. That sucks. And then I thought, and I'll never forget this thought in a million years. Then I literally saw that I had an arterial bleed. And I went, you're losing your arm. And then I was like, oh, I've got an arterial bleed, which if you have an arterial bleed, you've got, I'll be conservative and say 45 seconds to a minute to do something before you won't die. But in about 45 seconds, you're going to lose enough blood to where it's going to be hard for you to have the strength to solve it, if that makes sense. So
yes.
I remember seeing that and going, well, okay, yeah, you're going to lose your right arm, but you better solve that bleed or you die. And that would be stupid. Don't know why I used that word, but in my head, I remember saying, and then you die, and that would be stupid. So, yeah, I knew how bad it was. And I'll tell you this, after I looked at it under that light, I did not, and I'm not exaggerating. Well, I did actually look at it one more time, but I didn't look at my arm uncovered for probably a year. I mean, I literally ignored it. In fact, in hindsight, I should have wore a freaking eye patch on my right eye. I just didn't look. I didn't want to be reminded of it. The next time I looked at it was actually when they saved it, because they told me they were going to cut it off when I went into surgery. But I woke up the next morning, looked over, it was there, and they saved it. And actually, by the way, they told me. Now again, I was on a lot when they told me that they were going to cut it off. I was on quite a lot of drugs. I was like, do whatever you want, cut off the legs. I don't care. I was like crazy. But they told me when they saved it, the only reason that they even attempted to save it was because how many extremity surgeries they had done during that time frame because of V-beds. So they just were now so advanced on, and again, I don't know the details, but they just had new techniques. He said a year ago, we would have cut it off without even attempting to, again, do something different.
Did you ever find out what had happened to all the bad guys that were in the house? Did anyone ever kind of debrief you and say, hey, after the explosion went off, here's kind of how everything shook out afterwards?
Yes, that was years later, but yes. Yeah. I've never told anyone this, but I'll tell you, or everyone watching this. Only one person lived on that whole thing. And only one person lived. And the reason that person lived is because I didn't shoot him. And I could have. He actually had an AK. When I came into the room, his gun hit me in the chest.
And so was it? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, his gun hit, it was so close. I turned and his gun hit me. And the only reason I didn't shoot him is I could see behind him. I can't remember if it was pink or purple, but it was a color that stood out. I want to say pink, but again, I don't remember. But I could see like a pink or purple outline behind him. His wife was behind, or one of his, I don't know, was behind him. And that in that, millisecond, So I ended up taking the gun from him. I threw him outside the room. They took him, but he's the only one that lived. And ironically, it's one of my few regrets of my time, because that guy ended up being the main facilitator of the whole thing.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
So all the other guys, they weren't around to do anything anymore. But for many years, I wondered if he went through the system and then got out and went and hurt other people. So I've one of my biggest regrets is that.
That, man, did you not pull the trigger because you were concerned about the woman's safety? That's what it sounds like, which is a noble thing to do, right?
I look, to be perfectly honest with you, it's not noble. It's the level of hostage rescue training that we had and did on a continuous basis. Our primary mission, especially at that time, was hostage rescue. It was not taking out an insurgency. It was
Right.
hostage rescue. So I was doing hostage rescue tactics, essentially. And, that was a non-combatant, and just in my brain was wired, no shoot. In hindsight, I mean, I could have offset and shot him diagonal, but the decision I made in a millisecond was, the gun hit me and I just ended up grabbing it, and hitting him with, I think, mine, I forget, and then threw him outside the room. But yeah, I mean, again, it wasn't a noble, but we are absolutely trained in that HR, that if there is a non-combatant and you're shooting, like green tip, and 5.56 from literally, that would have been probably 6 inches away. I mean, it absolutely has a high likelihood of going through him and hitting
Right.
her.
Right.
And that was a non-combatant, a non-combatant. Also, with our training at that time, would be the same as like hostage. I mean,
Yeah. So I want to get into the transition stuff, which I know is a big passion of yours.
yeah.
How long after the injury do you transition out of the military?
Took about 2 years, I'd say.
And is it, and excuse my ignorance on this, but I truly don't know. When you're injured in the fashion you're injured, is it one of those things where they kind of tell you, hey, once you're healed up and we've done what we've done, you got to go? Or could you have stayed if you had wanted to and stayed in the unit in some capacity for
I
several more years?
I absolutely could have stayed. They couldn't have been more accommodating. They literally, whatever you need, whatever you want to do, literally, I could have done anything, and they stretched quite a lot of rules for me, quite frankly. And I can tell you right now, in hindsight, could I have gone back to a team? Yes. I know now I could have. At the time, let's say now we're at '06, at '06, Afghanistan, done. Nothing going on there.
Right.
Iraq, I knew it was going to be about 5 years of healing. In my head, and again, I couldn't have been more wrong, but I think you'll agree at the time, I'm like, 5 years. Okay, Iraq's not going to last 5 more
Right.
years, right? It can't. Afghanistan, already done. ISIS wasn't a thing. So in my head, I'm like, dude, I'm gonna stick around 5 more years. I'm gonna watch everyone deploy. I'm not going to be able to go, which is going to kill me. And then by the time I'm good, nothing's going to be happening. That's what I thought. And again, I think was pretty logical,
Yeah,
based
no,
on,
of course. Yeah.
now, obviously in hindsight, stuff hadn't even gotten crazy yet, but who would have been able to predict that? So, there was years I beat myself up for making, it was my decision to medically retire. I wasn't forced. It was my decision. And I chose that because of basically what I just said. I can tell you right now, I was not strong enough to watch everyone deploy and not be able to go. Couldn't have done it.
And so was that the biggest struggle for you when you got out? The fact that you kind of had to live with the fact that you knew, okay, I could have stayed in and I could be going with my friends and I could be back in Iraq in 08, 09, 2010, whatever time might be, but I'm here and that was my choice. Was that the biggest thing the biggest hurdle you had to clear?
That wasn't really a hurdle until about 5 years later when I figured out that around we'll say 2012 really is when I kind of figured out, oh shit, like, but up until 2012, what my real struggle was a identity crisis. I went from being, in one of the top units and the pinnacle of where I wanted to go in the military. And that's what I saw myself was. My job was my life. My job was my identity. That's who I wanted to be as a kid. And that's who I was. And now I wasn't that. So I struggled with a massive identity crisis of I'm no longer that. And I was never prepared to be anything else. So I had to figure out, well, who am I now? And quite frankly, that job was never who I was. That was my job.
Right.
So I didn't have a healthy identity. I'm not saying I had a healthy identity when I was doing the job. I'm saying when I lost the job, I lost my identity. And then I realized that I never had an identity outside of my job.
So do you wish, if you could go back in time, do you wish that when you were in Delta and you're doing the things that operators do, that you had looked at it maybe a little differently? It's not, this is who I am, but this is my job. It's not a 9 to 5 job, but it is a job. And that you had focused on private, personal things maybe more than you did at the time.
No, I don't think you can.
Okay.
It is your life and you have to treat it as such, or you won't be able to keep up with there you're struggling to keep up with the people around you. Like when you're in another unit, you can kind of like, I don't have to, I'm not stressed that, people are nipping my heels to because they're so much better than me. But when you're there, every day is a fight to keep up. Um, and so you have to commit your life to it and all your time. Honestly, I wouldn't change anything. And the reason I say that, even the explosion, I mean, I wouldn't change anything because it's made me who I am today. Do I wish my right arm worked 100%? Absolutely. But it's taught me so many things about myself that I would have never learned another way.
Did you struggle with PTSD or substances like drinking or anything like that when you got out, when you're going through this identity crisis?
So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is I definitely was an alcoholic, and I was also abusing opiates that I was given for for my arm. But I was taking them. Again, I had never taken a drug in my life. I didn't really know. I didn't understand how addictive they were. No one ever said, "Hey, by the way, this is basically heroin." Like no one told me that. But I was definitely drinking too much. And as far as PTSD, I mean, I have a very complicated view on PTSD, and I don't like PTSD as a term, and I don't like PTS. I'm not singling out the D. The reason is PTSD as a diagnosis of mental health has nothing to do with the military. It has nothing to do with veterans, and it has nothing to do with combat. It is a catch-all phrase. You can have legitimate PTSD from a car accident. You can have PTSD from a million things. So when an umbrella term is used to kind of mean everything, to me, it means nothing.
Right. Yep. No, that's very fair.
Yeah. So it's like if it has nothing to do with specifically with combat or veterans, then everyone kept telling me you have PTSD, you have PTSD, you have PTSD, and I just kept hearing it going. You're telling me what I should feel. You're telling me what it should be, and I'm telling you what it is.
Right.
Like that's not the issues I'm having. And now, having done a ton of research and really went down the rabbit hole, I am working on my own concept of what I think is specific to combat veterans. And I have one thing I made up called LTSD, although I don't think this is everyone, but a lot of people identify with this, especially from the special operations community. And, I made it up. LTSD. I don't have PTSD. I have LTSD, which stands for I have lack of traumatic stress disorder. When you are good in traumatic stress, when you are good in chaos, you are fundamentally rewired to where now when chaos is not in the environment, the chaos is in your mind. You need a chaotic environment in order, because that's your jam. You've been reverse wired to be calm in chaos. Therefore, when things are calm, your mind is chaos.
Right. Wow, that's fascinating. Wow.
And again, it's resonated with people that I explain it to. And so on that note though, if you have LTSD, if you are calm in chaos and the environment, which all of war is chaos, so that's not a big deal. But back home, it's calm. So if your home life is calm, the chaos is in your mind. How do you need that chaos in the environment to calm yourself? So what do? Simple. And subconsciously, by the way, you're not conscious of this, but you subconsciously create chaos. Drinking, getting in fights with your significant other, buying a motorcycle and, riding freaking 120 miles an hour, which a lot of guys do, buying all these dangerous base jumping, which was a whole different thing that guys got into. You have to create that chaos in the environment, and then you're calm again. And guys don't even realize that why they're creating the chaos. But that's why. It's because it calms them.
And so with this LTSD that you've coined, how did you, like you said, opioids, alcohol, so you're creating chaos in your private life, but now how do you battle that? Like, what are you doing? What's Tyler Gray doing when he is drinking too much, or when the opioids start coming? How are you offsetting that LTSD?
Well, so what I learned now is, once you've been what I call reverse wired to be calm in chaos, I don't think, at least I haven't seen, I don't think you go backwards. And I don't, so many guys, if I was just the way I was before, sorry, ain't going to happen. You're not, and you're never going to be. No different than a million other things that have nothing to do with the military or combat. You at 20, you can't say, I wish I was 10 again.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, the lesson that I've learned or what I do is I still need chaos. What I've learned is to create healthy chaos. So for me, and kind of a great segue. I mean, not that I'm telling you to segue, but working on set for me, it's super chaotic, but that's healthy chaos. So that's why I've loved working on set and in front of and behind the cameras, because it's extremely high stress. It's very chaotic. I wouldn't call it traumatic, but it's definitely chaotic and it's definitely stressful. And I'm built for it. I love it. And so the chaos in the job, I'm calm doing it. And that's the healthy chaos in my life.
And that is a great segue, because that was very literally the next thing we're going to talk about. So for the viewers, Tyler's been on SEAL Team for years. SEAL Team now is on Paramount Plus. It's been a major, major hit. If you love war movies, if you love anything related to military shows, it is the show for you. So let's get into SEAL Team here for a brief moment. Yep. Walk me through how you ended up on the most popular military show on TV. And I'll remind you and the viewers, the same year SEAL Team came out, if you remember this, there were two other military shows. One of them was, I think, called Six on History Channel, and that lasted maybe a season two tops. The other one I think was called Valor, and that might have been on the CW, and that was atrociously bad. But SEAL Team has not only survived, it has a huge following. So how did you get roped into the SEAL Team CBS world?
So I knew, so Mark Owen was who wrote the book No Easy Day,
Right.
was a kind of the, or not kind of, was the one with Chris Chulak that, they shopped the idea of the show for years, I think 4 years or something like that. So, and I knew him, and he knew I'd worked in the industry, advisor and everything. So once the show got greenlit, they needed an experience, and he was also doing something. I can't remember what he was doing, but they needed a person who had a special operations background but had also worked in film as an advisor. So they called me, and it was literally a last minute thing. And it was like, I think they called me on a Wednesday and were like, can you fly to New Orleans tomorrow for 6 weeks? And again, it's one of those things, I had to quit a job to do it pretty much. And I did on a very big risk. And then I went, and how I got on camera is funny, because I went there as the advisor. And I read, the script, and I looked at everything, and I was like, you don't have enough people. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you got 4 actors for the combat part, and I'm like, but that's not enough. That's not enough. Like, as soon as you start doing CQB, you're going to break off, and you're not going to have enough people. And I really had to convince him of it, because I was like, example, I'm like, you go into a room, there was a scene where, like, we went into a room, and there was like kids or women, I forget, and like all 4 characters had dialogue with each other, and I'm like, no one's going to the women or kids. I'm
Right.
like, yeah, which you wouldn't do, and I get, for dramatic reasons, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? I don't know. I get it, but in the background, you need something happening. You need action being done to kind of justify the conversation. And so they were like, oh, all right, cool. And then I was also like, and I'll do, there were some pretty complex, like, breaching stunt type things, or not even stunt, very military specific things that we were doing. So I was like, I'll do it. And it was much easier for me to do a door breach with a shotgun than to teach an actor how to do it. I've been doing it for years. So that's how I got on camera. And, that was the pilot. And then when it got picked up, I stayed on the team. And now, after season 6, I've now filmed as the character for over 100 episodes, which is crazy to me.
Well, it's wildly impressive. I got to know though, how accurate was it? Would you say, when it was initially written, before you came in and read the script? Like, because like you said, Mark Owens, which the guy who wrote the book No Easy Day, he's famous for being a member of the Bin Laden raid. I think he wrote another book as well.
Yeah.
He obviously was involved. He knows CQB. He was a tier 1 operator. But did they get it pretty accurate before you were able to give your input, or were there things where you kind of like, that's not really what we would be doing in a gunfight?
I mean, that's hard to say. So the best way to say it would be, it was as, he had a lot of influence on the script. So it was as good and authentic and, real as it could be in script form. What then happens though is, and this is just how it is, you're never going to change this. Then it's written away, and then you go to the location, and the location is never going to fit exactly what's written. So it's not about that it was wrong. It's just, you then have to rewrite the action to the location, because it's so specific with the way, with CQB and everything. So no, it was good as it could be. And really the changes I made were just on the day, making the location meet the intent of the action that was written.
So I ask a question to all of the tier 1 guys I interview, and you are by far, I would say, the one in a unique position to answer it. So I interviewed a guy by the name of Chris Van Zant almost a year ago at this point, from the same unit you served in. And he talked about how when SEAL Team Devru guys came over in Iraq, similar to what you were talking about earlier, how they, I don't know if you'd say augmented, or they used them to kind of fill roles, right? It might have been the same years for all I know that he was talking about. From your experience, how similar are those two units? Because they're kind of big rivals. And then what would be the difference in like simplified terms for the audience between the guys in DevGru and then guys that are in the unit?
So I'll tell you this. I'll say this about Dev Group, and then I'll say this about, quite frankly, 24 NATO, high-end special operations units. In my experience, and I'm speaking for myself, by and large, the guys, all the same.
I've heard that before, yeah.
Freaking Grom, freaking KSK, you name it. It's the same guys, the same mentality across all of them. In fact, even like, I know when Larry Vickers went to Russia, years ago, the Alpha Group guys, he was like, dude, they're just like us, So, so the guys are the same, and the Dev Group guys, as far as the guys, same. I would say the differences are in the overall units, in the structure, and to me, the biggest difference between those two units, and again, my opinion, is that everyone on Dev is a SEAL. Everyone. They're all SEALs. So they have a major basis of similarity because they all come from the teams. The unit recruits not just Army-wide, but U.S. military-wide. To give you an example, when I got blown up, the guy that got blown up with me, standing literally right next to me, before he was in the unit, he was a Navy hard hat diver.
No shit. Wow.
So the guys there come from, you could have people from the Marine Corps, you could have people from, a Navy hard hat diver, you could have Rangers, SF, you could have, there's so many different backgrounds. And so both of those things, in my opinion, having everyone have the same common background has its advantages and disadvantages. And then having everyone have completely different backgrounds has its advantages and its disadvantages. But I think that's the huge fundamental difference in those two units. And those advantages and disadvantages, I believe those are that's the basis cause of those different personalities of each unit.
So this will be the last question. This has been an outstanding interview. You've been awesome. You've given us a lot of really neat information. You've been an open book, which we always appreciate. And this is kind of a broader picture, maybe more personal one. But and I'm speaking for, I think, the way a lot of people feel is there's a lot of negativity these days in America. It seems like everyone is at their throat of everyone else. You're on a show that's popular with all people. You're on a show that, kind of represents America in a positive light, the military in a positive light. You served in the worst of situations. For people who might be down and out or losing faith in the country or think this is a terrible place, what would you say to them to remind them, like, we're lucky to be here and we got some badass dudes who will make sure everything's going to be okay?
So it's a great question, and I'll say it this way. Yes, people are at each other's throats, and I am now of the opinion that that's not accidental. I absolutely believe it's intentional, because you can see it. I believe it's intentional, and therefore, to me, the way to heal this country is not to give in to that intentional separation. It's don't let whatever, the powers that be, whatever you want to call it, don't let them separate us. Don't let them make us hate each other for our differences. At the end of the day, We are all part of the same country, and we absolutely have infinitely more in common
Right.
than we have differences. So I believe this country now needs to essentially band together, specifically despite, why are we being separated? And look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any means, but I don't see how, there's something stoking the fire. I'm not saying I know what it is, but I'm saying that we need to fight that fire and come together as Americans and unify, and look for similarities rather than look for differences.
I agree. That was a great answer. Well, Tyler, you are welcome back anytime you want on American Joyride. We're always happy to have not just you, but any veteran who has served this country is welcome here. Tell the viewers real quick where they can find you on social media.
So on Instagram, which is really all I use now, Tyler A, and then last name Gray with an E. So Tyler A Gray on Instagram, and yeah, I try and put out positive messages and kind of stuff that I've talked about here. Just try and post what I've learned. So if that's interesting to you, then I'll keep putting out more stuff like this.
I've seen you're doing like daily videos. I see you putting those out there, so those are really neat. So, all right, thank you, and thanks for everyone tuning in. We always appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, David.